the diplomatic standoff and the worsening ties between India and Canada. And that is set to have a rather unlikely impact on something that is extremely crucial, in fact, part of our daily life, part of our daily food. I'm talking about masoor dal. That's right, red lentils. Because India, for the last year, financial year 2022-23, imported around 4 to 5 lakh tons of masoor dal or red lentils from Canada, which is worth over 3,000 crore rupees. And now, with ties between the two countries souring with every passing day, there are doubts that we might not be getting all those lakhs and tons of masoor dal from Canada into India. So what happens? Are we looking at a sudden price rise as far as masoor dal in India is concerned? What is India going to do if we're not going to get any more from the prime supplier of red lentils to India, which is Canada? To understand that better, we have a very special guest joining us. We have Shweta Saini, agricultural economist and founder and CEO Arcus Policy Research Now, joining us. Thank you so much for being with us, Shweta. There is already now a little bit of fears, although there's information out there that we might get stock which we are not going to get from Canada. Australia could be the replacement. And also, we're understanding that there's already stock that we've imported from Canada that is lying in Indian ports. As of date, masoor dal is selling in India at 92 to 93 rupees per kilo, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us, are we safe as far as masoor dal situation is concerned in India?
Lovely. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to share with you about the pulses situation. And just a context before we start talking about it, amongst the pulses that we have in India, lentil is the 5th largest crop here. It has about 5% share in the 27.5 million tons of pulses that we produce. If it was a normal year, we're looking at a crop size, bumper crop size of lentil in the country today, that's about 1.6 million tons. If we look at the imports figure already, which is since April to August in the 5 months, we are looking at bumper imports of about 0.6 million tons, which you've also already mentioned. But this is something that is the level of imports that we've not done in the last 5 years. So overall, what does it say? That if it were a normal situation, there doesn't seem to be much problem with the availability of lentil in the country, which has an annual consumption of about 2.3, 2.2 million tons. So we have enough availability. But again, the year is not normal because we are looking at a year when we're looking at double-digit inflation in the pulses, especially in case of gram, where the monthly momentum is picking up very fast because of a crop we are told is tiny and enough tracking has been done. Tur dal, both the kharif, tur and urad dals are smaller than last year, and therefore we're seeing double-digit inflation. In fact, if we looked at last year, we're looking at last month, we're looking at a tur inflation of 32%. We're looking at a moong inflation of about 9%. Total pulses is at 13%. So overall, if looked at in silo, it is important that the lentil, the crop this year looks bumper. But there is crisis in other pulses, and therefore we are anticipating that some demand from other pulses, especially tur, would shift to crop like lentil, and therefore we are assessing that the trade already understood this kind of substitution, therefore imported bumper. But yes, Canada is the most important supplier of lentil to the country. We have about 70% of our annual imports of lentil coming from Canada.
70% of all lentils or only red lentils?
Red lentils, for one.
Right, 70% of all red lentils in India come from Canada. Of course, we have other countries supplying other forms of lentils and pulses.
100%. We've got Australia placed, Tanzania for tur, Mozambique, and other countries, of course, African countries support us on other pulses. But in case of lentils, approximately 70% comes from Canada, and Australia is about 1/4. So clearly, as from what it appears, it may not happen that in a current year, where particularly we're looking at an inflation year with very high rates of inflation already, it's an election year. So we do not really anticipate that such kind of restriction would happen, particularly when we are already fighting double-digit inflation in other pulses. So that's it.
I'm trying to make the situation very simple for all those watching us. So the fear is that with all this India-Canada tensions spiraling with every passing day, because bear in mind, all Indian consumers out there, including me, we've just been through crazy tomato prices. And then even the dal prices shot up right after tomato prices came down. So the thalinomics in India has gone haywire in the recent past. So and thankfully, thanks to government intervention, we've brought tomato prices under control. We've got onion prices under control, and there's great domestic procurement of pulses, which has been improved in the recent past, which is also helping us shore up our pulses for the people as well. So the fear for all those watching this, Shweta, is that we hope because of some global geopolitical issues, my masoor dal does not go up. So so net you're saying that we're absolutely safe. That there's very little chance that there'll be a spike in masoor dal prices going forward.
So I'll just put it a little differently. I'm just saying we were already in a situation where pulses is undergoing a crisis. So, and if Canada does decide, or that trade does decide to not have imports from Canada, we could see a spike, but I think that may not happen because it is a critical year for the country today. So therefore, I do not see restrictions on these grounds having any additional impact. But having said this, pulses are already in a crisis. But let me highlight one more thing. We needn't have that small a daira of thinking. Now, you may actually be looking at importing, and therefore importing and dumping in the domestic prices to ensure that the prices stabilize. But you need to understand that we are in the season where the next crop will get sown. So if imports land in India at very low prices, the incentive to grow the next season reduces. So while the country or the government is walking that tightrope where it has to ensure that consumers get it cheap, it also has to ensure that the farmers' remunerative incentives continue. And therefore, I think it's a tricky balance that the government does. So in case of pulses, they've maintained an open import policy. And it is an election year. We anticipate the prices may not rise as much. But because we are an agriculture economist, we also wish to ensure that the landed price do not reduce the incentive of the farmers to sow lentil in the next season, which I don't see at the current level of prices is going to happen. So clearly, pulses is under a little threat, but it was any which ways even before Canadian crisis happening. But in case of lentils in silo, the situation doesn't look too bad.
Right. And it's interesting we discuss the masoor dal, Shweta, because just a few weeks ago, the question was on tur dal, which we import from countries as far away as Mozambique. So clearly, pulses have been under one kind of crisis or the other, all kinds of pulses, on the most used of them all. And Shweta, that's the concern, isn't it? The tur dal and the masoor dal is used across the country from north to south, east to west. The moment they say pili dal or yellow dal, it's invariably a tur or a masoor dal that's used. So in that sense, there needs to be a longer term strategy to ensure that these supplies remain constant for Indian consumers, irrespective of any kind of global tensions that might erupt at any stage.
100%. I totally concur with it. So let's take an example of you cannot have sambar being made from any other dal. So clearly there is a sticky demand in case of pulses like tur, and therefore therefore the whole idea of dumping or importing pulses may actually work for a season, but the country, for its nutritional and food security, needs a longer term strategy, wherein we have to ensure that the yields of most of our pulses stay high, the acreages continue, and the remunerative incentive for farmers continue. We cannot happen. So we've written a recent article, me and Mr. Siraj Hussain had written it, and we'd shown how in case of tur, the import dependence has actually doubled in the last 3 years. So, it might just help. And ironically, we still are looking at very high tur inflation rates. So clearly, it's a tricky balance, but we have to ensure that while consumers are being supported, you cannot really be depending on countries like Africa and Australia to be producing pulses for you. It's a staple crop for India. It's important for our nutrition. And therefore, I feel that while consumers' concerns, and including people like us, our concerns are really important. Food inflation has been double digit, has been high. Even when it started to moderate recent year, it has been building up for the last year and a half. So we are clearly not out of the woods. But to really have the entire burden of inflation on farmers is also unfair. So somewhere government will have to ensure a long-term strategy where pulses farmers
Right.
continue to produce what they produce.
Right. Shweta Saini, there, agricultural economist and founder and CEO of Arcus Policy Research, joining us and helping put things in perspective from global geopolitics to our very own little masoor dal on our plate. Shweta, great talking to you and hope to keep having you on the show again and again. But for now, we'll let go of you because we've completely run out of time here on this edition of Business Plus. Shweta, thank you so much for being with us.